If the world can find a way to capitalise on women's bodies, they will.
Don't make us mad.
How much noise there is.
Pilates is great, so is yoga, so is swimming, but it's not going to give you the same results as strength training.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. Nobody is talking about that.
Wow. I apologise for mansplaining.
Yeah, I think I almost cried because I'm like, is that me?
Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Trainer Roundtable at Ultimate Performance. Today we're going to be looking at women's health, specifically supporting women through their perimenopause and menopause and beyond. So in the studio today, we have Lisa, one of our lovely trainers. We also have Harry, who's another trainer at Ultimate Performance. And then we also have Lisa Jedan, who is one of my lovely clients and also a leading podcaster within the menopause space.
It's great to be here.
So what actually happens during perimenopause? Our bodies go through massive hormonal shifts, similar to how we do through puberty, but this time we're now going through a decline in hormones. So quite often the symptoms might start creeping in quite early on, and it can be very simple things such as brain fog, hot flushes, lower energy, kind of feeling more unstable with their mood. And these are things that can often show it symptom-wise long before it will show on a blood test. And so quite often I've had with a lot of female clients is they've started feeling the symptoms of perimenopause. They've gone to the doctors, they've gone and had their bloods checked, and the doctor's gone, no, everything's fine.
Or a lot of them think it's just burnout.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I've just been working too hard. But what's actually happening is during perimenopause, and actually it's from the age of 35. Like perimenopause begins in the brain at age 35. And that's when your hormones start going on this roller coaster ride. So you're still cycling, you're still having your menstrual cycle, but sometimes it's really heavy, sometimes it's really light. And I guess the way sometimes I like to talk about it, or I've heard a doctor talk about it, is your ovaries, which are the main creator of our estrogen and progesterone, are like little endocrine Wi-Fi. And they literally touch every part of our body. Like there are estrogen receptors all over our body, in our brain, in our heart, in our muscle tissue. So that's why the symptoms are so wide-ranging. The other thing people don't know that I think they should is that women lose 20% of their bone density within the first 5 to 7 years of menopause. Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. Nobody is talking about
That's
that.
wild.
Nobody's talking about that. And menopause itself it's actually just a medical term. It's literally when a woman has gone 12 months without having a period. So it's like a moment in time. So you have perimenopause, which can last any time between 3 and 10 years. That's like a decade of your time. Menopause, which is a moment in time, it's 12 months where you've gone without a period. And then after that, you are in post-menopause. You know, the great news is that I think women reach their peak muscle mass at like age 30.
30, yeah.
Age 30, yeah. And then it declines about 3 to 5% every decade after that.
As in assuming their lifestyle, they don't train.
Yes, exactly. And then menopause accelerates that process. So if I could tell anybody anything, it's like start strength training now, because you do have a choice in how you experience perimenopause and menopause.
Yeah, and I think the reason that it's really important to have like load-bearing exercises when it comes down to that bone density. So the way I like to see it is our estrogen works as a little conductor in our brain for our osteoblasts and osteoclasts, which is our bone creators and bone destroyers. Now we have these little guys milling around our skeleton the whole way through our life, creating and destroying bone. When estrogen starts to decline, that conductor stops being as functional. He starts falling asleep at work. And so the bone destroyers now start accelerating. So they're now destroying more bone than they're creating. And that's what causes that kind of acceleration in bone loss. So it's very much tied to our estrogen levels. So as soon as your body stops producing estrogen, those bone destroyers are now working overtime. And that's why women lose so much bone in that first 5 years. But on the flip side, throughout our life, if we're doing load-bearing exercise, or if we're training with weight, our body's going to simulate more of that bone creators. So our bones are going to get denser. I often say, think of it a bit like when you have a tree in a windy area, that tree's trunk is going to get thicker and thicker and thicker to prevent it from falling over in the wind. The same applies to our bones. So when we apply force to our bones over time, we're going to increase that density. So when we do reach that age where we no longer have the hormonal support, we at least have nice, thick, strong bones to hold ourselves up. So when we lose a bit, we've got a little bit more to lose.
Do you guys ever, do you know the Dr. Vonda Wright? She's an orthopedic surgeon. She's also a huge proponent of strength training. And she has this line that always kills me because she always says, a hot flash won't kill you, but a hip fracture will. And I saw her speak the other day, and she said, if you break your hip, there's a 30% chance that you will not go home from the hospital. And there's a 50% chance that you will die within 1 year. That is a crazy statistic.
Yeah,
and if there is not a better argument for women to start strength training, I don't know what is.
You don't want to face those odds, do you?
No. And the other part of it is not just the strength side of things, but the mental side of things. Because another thing that's going on with women is how with the drop in estrogen, it affects their cognitive function as well. But it also, women just start feeling a bit meh. You just kind of, like, it's not a medical term, right? But like, I just feel a bit meh. And my experience training was, you know, you push yourself and you do things you never thought you could do. And I would leave a session with Aoife going, if I can do this, I can do anything. Like, I can deal with my teenage daughter. I can go nail that presentation that I have at work. I think people really play down that part of it, actually, what it does for your mental health.
It's empowering.
As well. It's 1 hour just for you.
I think that one's really important as well, actually, during the perimenopause, because as your progesterone starts to decline, you'll also feel that in terms of how you tolerate stress. So our progesterone is like our calming hormone. It helps with our sleep. It helps us feel calm. And so when that starts to decline, your ability to tolerate stress gets a lot less. And so simple things like being able to take that time for yourself and push yourself is a great de-stressor. It can help with the sleep. It can help with the kind of the mood swings that come with that decline in progesterone. So training will also have a massive benefit on what you actually need support with during that time, which quite often is stress management, which is a massive part of why women often really struggle during perimenopause, is because they haven't got kind of good support around their stress management. They might be sleeping poorly, they might have a stressful job, they might have kids. And all these kind of combining factors often lead you to pick up poor habits for stress management, such as drinking more alcohol, eating more kind of like not so healthy food. So actually having an outlet during that time can be really, really positive beyond just the physical benefits, but psychologically.
And then touching on that is when you talk about stress and you've got all them bad habits, they're only going to exacerbate the symptoms of perimenopause. It's like you're choosing easy food and you're not sleeping, you're high stressed, you're not doing anything to control that. So like you say, that 1 hour of your day, that strength training is going to mitigate some of that. If you think about the hormones it releases and sort of just the energy you have after training, like so much higher than when you're coming in. So many people walk in and like, oh, I really don't want to do this. I don't want to do it. And they leave and they're like, I'm good. And I'm like, well, there you go.
I always say you never regret going to the gym.
No.
Like, you'll never regret training. You might not want to do it when you get there, but you'll never regret it once you've done it.
No.
I scream at them all the time. It's movement is medicine. A training session is going to make everything better. Even if you're not moving the same way you were 2 days ago. You might not be pushing the same though, but you're still in there, you're still moving, and you're still going to feel better for it.
Yeah, and I think there's an aspect of taking back control as well, actually. I think, you know, when you're training, you're putting that hour into yourself, as you were saying, and you're kind of taking control of an aspect of your life. And I think a lot of time, a lot of women, when they're approaching that time in perimenopause, they're feeling very out of control of their own life. And so actually having something that you can take with both hands and go, I'm going to take control of my own life and I'm going to put this time into myself and I know I'm going to feel better for it, I think can be really, really empowering.
I think a lot of women love a plan. Like I had Dr. Shazadi Harper on, she's the perimenopause doctor, and she was saying no matter how high flying you are, how big an executive you are, or if you're a mom of 3, women love a plan. And I know I really appreciated that. I had to show up every day, the accountability, right? I had to show up the 2 or 3 times a week. You know, I had to take control of my diet and I had to, you know, weigh myself and eat properly. But somebody was holding my hand along the way and showing me the way and just kept saying, you know, trust the process, trust the process. And in the midst of a busy life, a plan is really, really helpful.
I think that's what the benefit of where a trainer can come in, because they can take away that thinking for you, or that worrying of like, should I be doing this? Is this the right thing to do? It kind of like, trainers like having trainers themselves, because we all like to have someone kind of provide that.
You just don't have to think.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just don't have to think when you trainer. It's great having your own trainer. But I think that was one of the biggest things I've heard from the female clients I've worked with, is actually it's one less thing that they have to worry about. It's one less thing that's added into the ginormous bucket of stuff in their life that they've just got to deal with. And I think if we can kind of like keep taking it out, and they've got the confidence that it's a plan that's going to take them to where they want to get to, and it's a plan that's going to help, obviously I think that's one of the better things that we can do for someone.
Well, because I think one of the things that's interesting, now you guys have women across the age range, and me, like most women, I was ignorant of perimenopause like everybody else is in the beginning. You know, even 10 years ago, never mind 5 years ago, nobody was talking about it the way they're talking about it now.
I think the awareness has certainly improved. What I can understand from the conversations that I'm having is the awareness has come on massively. I think there's still a way to go, because I think we could get a lot more, especially obviously men, involved in conversations and actually listening to podcasts and like going and learning about what happens, because then it accelerates it a little bit further. But from what I can tell, is the clients I'm talking to, they know a lot about menopause now. They learn what I reckon is probably a lot more than they did maybe 5-10 years ago, as you were saying. But I think it's really, really important that we just keep nudging that along, just so we further educate ourselves. We still have these conversations in 5-10 years time, but the knowledge base improves, you know, the kind of a way that people can go about this improves.
No, I think the taboo actually has really lifted, because I even remember at kind of the early starts of my career, I think I would have been too awkward to ask a client whether they had their menopause, because it was always like, you know, something you don't talk about. Like, it was like, you don't ask about that. It's not something that was really an open conversation. And in the kind of like 10 years I've been a trainer, I've watched it kind of develop into being something that is a very open conversation. It is something I talk to all my clients about. It is something I'll ask when I very first meet one. So it's nice to see that it is something that we are all talking about openly, because I think it's funny, we spend, you know, when you're growing up, you talk about puberty, and that ultimately is a very similar life stage. You're going through a massive hormonal shift that's going to have quite a lasting impact on your body, and it's an open discussion. Kids are educated about it. You know, it's something that your parents will talk to you about. But when it comes to this kind of latter life stage where you're going through the exact same thing all over and again, no one was really talking about it. Kind of women would just, you know, suffer in silence.
I think you can assume now that if a client comes in and she's 45 years of age or older, she is in perimenopause. I think that they're changing it actually here with the NHS, that they're not even giving you a blood test after the age of 45. You are just in perimenopause. That is just what's happening. But I think, I remember where I was going, Harry, with my point earlier. I think, though, most women, especially in their 30s coming in, or their early 40s, you're coming in at first for aesthetic reasons. Like, that was my reason. I was like, you know, my body's changing, or my skin is changing. What I used to do isn't working anymore. The way I eat, or, you know, when I diet, it doesn't work anymore.
I think quite often it can start off like that. Like with you, I think that's a perfect example. You first kind of came in for that, and then as time goes on, the secondary reasons, the health reasons, often tend to start kicking in of being like, oh, actually I feel like I should be doing this for more than just how I look. And I think in terms of how you relate to your training and you relate to like what you're doing in the gym, I think the more you reinforce it as being something that is completely holistic, it's not just about I want to look like this, because you'll probably achieve that in relatively good time if you're following a very good plan and you're kind of committed to it, where actually the like long-term benefits are going to come from you continuing that throughout your life, not just doing it for a kind of 12-week before and after.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, you taught me, they're life lessons. I mean, these are lessons for life around moving your body, how to eat. Like, I can now have a Chinese takeaway, and I know exactly it's going to take me 3 days to get that extra kilo off. And I know that it's really just water, because I really didn't gain or eat a kilo of Chinese food. But I now know, like, you get so, you know, everybody's talking about mindfulness. I feel like you help people become really mindful about their body. Like, all of a sudden I was really mindful about, oh, when I eat that, I get bloated. Yeah. So I should stop eating that because it doesn't make me feel good. Or when I eat that, I can walk away from the dinner table and I feel better. And I think these are just great lessons for life. I mean, it changes the way I cook for my entire family, you know, making it kind of, it has ripple effects through everybody.
If we were looking at like kind of common approaches of managing perimenopause, you know, quite often I think there's a few trends that have been going around. Like right now we have Pilates is making a massive comeback. But in terms of with strength training, there are certain benefits that you're not going to get from kind of lighter classes or body weight training. And so I'm going to kind of bring it to the floor. What are your thoughts on this?
As you've kind of like, you've said before, we spoke about progressive overload and lifting weights, right? And that's what's going to create that adaptation and that stimulus, and that's what you need. Pilates is great because it's movement, so is yoga, so is swimming, so is walking, and we still want to encourage that, but it's not going to give you the same results as strength training will do.
Because I think one maybe mistake that people make when they're going through different hormone shifts is they're like, if I just work out harder, I'm going to do more HIIT. If I do more cardio, or if I just eat less, or if I try fasting. And I don't think any of that's really sustainable. And that's, I think, the practice that we're talking about here, the combination of the strength training with the nutritional guidance that you provide is a sustainable practice for women. Because actually all those, not eating, if you speak to a lot of nutritionists, they don't like women fasting because it raises their cortisol. So it doesn't help with the stress. Yep. They don't like women doing too much HIIT, too much cardio because it raises their cortisol. Now, some cortisol is really good, and it is good when you're, running your marathon or you are doing a HIIT class. But again, sustained over time, if your hormones are shifting, there's probably some times of the months where it's good and some times of the months where it's not good.
Because your recovery can also be impeded as well by the fact that your body is struggling to tolerate stress less than it used to. So training is still a stressor on the body, like especially something like high intensity training like HIIT. That's quite a substantial stress on the body, and it can be a struggle to recover from during perimenopause. So actually being able to maximize your training for your recovery is also really, really important. And that's why, I think often the less is more when it comes to especially strength training. It's not necessarily training every single day, hitting the same body parts every single day where you're not actually recovering from what you're doing. I think it's really important to actually kind of look at your week and look at how you can maximize the time across the week, but also have time for rest and have time to recover too.
Agreed.
Yeah, downtime as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you can hit the bare minimum across a couple of sessions a week, and you've covered the majority of the bases you're ever going to need, just from a strength training perspective. And I think that's really important in terms of like really pushing the recovery element, because I was reading as we were going through the prep for the kind of podcast there, is the recovery part is so much more important than anything else because of the decline in a lot of the hormones. Those are the primary hormones that would also facilitate recovery. Yeah. And obviously as they're coming down, I've got to be really careful with this one. I apologise for mansplaining. But as they're coming down, obviously they're not going to be as present. So you can't necessarily hit the threshold that you potentially could have done 20, 30 years ago. But if you prioritise recovery, then obviously you can still get to the benefits of strength training without overdoing it on the stress. And I'm going to shut up now.
But then also
put it back in my box.
That's where we come in terms of meeting the women where they're at when they come in. If you've had a crap night's sleep, or you've had the more stressful day, or you're feeling weaker, or any of the symptoms that you come to us with, and it's about how we adapt the training for you as well. So we've got to understand that too.
Yeah, in hindsight, actually, when I was training, I had a few like minor injuries. Like we thought I pulled a muscle, or we thought I kind of pulled a joint. And I didn't know it then, but now I know that it was probably, again, my hormone shifting, and the decline in estrogen means that you kind of just don't have like your joints and everything aren't getting greased up the way they used to. So that was probably causing that. And the amazing thing was, I didn't just walk away, right? Like listen, that's just me. I'm a little bit of a crazy person, but I didn't just go, you know what, I've got an injury, I'm out.
Yeah.
I was able to work with Aoife. She completely reprogrammed everything, changed the way I moved, changed the tempo, changed the weight. And the weights in terms of like heaviness or whatever dropped. We changed the way we moved, and I still saw progress even when I was injured. And sometimes it was like a 6-month I don't even know, my knee.
We had a good while.
We had a good while.
We had a good while where we had to really adapt your training because it was your
Yes.
knee and your shoulder.
Yes.
So it was like both ends of the body.
Yeah.
Like, so we had to adapt for your upper and your
Yeah.
lower in different ways.
But you loved it. I remember you said, I love it
So much
because
fun.
it's making me think
Yeah.
differently about how to help you move as well and how to adapt the programming. So I love that. You know, some people go, I'm injured, and then they just don't move anymore. They just sit and wait for their injury to go. But you can actually keep moving in a very safe way and still see progress.
Which is often the worst thing to do for an injury as well, is actually to go, okay, I'm not going to do anything, because you've now taken an area that is weakened because it's injured, and you're going to let it get even weaker. And so one of the most important things I think to do post-injury is actually to really focus on strengthening that area so it's got support. So like, I think you're a really good example of then where we still continue to work around your injuries. We didn't just go, okay, we're not going to move your arm anymore. It was like, okay, we might have to just move it a little bit differently, or we might have to change how we approach it. And I also think from what you were saying, Lisa, about adapting your training to your client, I think a lot of the time people see like what UP does on social media, and they'll see, you know, our kind of hardest sessions and clients getting really smashed.
Yep.
And it's also be aware that if you come in and you're new and you've never trained before and you're nervous about training, we are not going to do that to you in your first session. You know, it's something that you earn the right to really push hard in the gym and to really train. And it's something that you will ease a client in over time. And especially if you are having to make considerations for them hormonally or lifestyle. So you're always going to match, you know, that's what the personal training is. You're always going to match the client in front of you, which I think is a really important kind of lesson or something to be aware of if you're coming in.
Yep.
One of the things we used to talk about as well, and I would love to hear from you guys. Is that okay if I ask a question?
Yeah.
Is women's cycles, like their menstrual cycles, and how you train in the first part of your cycle versus how you train in the second part of your cycle. Is that something that you guys take into consideration?
May I?
You can go first. Go.
So I have a couple of female clients that we really are considerate because of the way the hair cycle impacts them, and I think it's we do it on an auto-regulation basis. So what that basically means is when she'll come in and she'll be like, I physically cannot do this. I'm absolutely wrecked. I'm knackered. I haven't slept very well. Like, it's going absolutely crazy for me. Can we adjust it? And it's like, yes, of course you can. There's from the reading, it's like there's not really anything that you would need to specifically change. You can still train pretty normally, from what I can understand. But I think the caveat is, are you in the mood to? Do you have that mental energy to go, right, I'm going to really push this? And sometimes you just don't, and you back off a little bit. You do what you can. It's because it's not a session wasted, because something's better than nothing in that instance. And then usually the recovery is after 3-4 days, and then they're back to normal. During the month you can kind of like see how that works, which is really cool. But we know that sometimes it's going to be a really, really good session. It's going to be really heavy. Sometimes it's pretty normal, and then other times you just need to make the concession and go, right, let's see what we can do. And I think that's how, off the back of those conversations, that's how we work.
I don't disagree with that. It feels less empowering when you're like, oh, my cycle's here, and oh, I can't move. And actually, some women are stronger on their cycle. I actually find I can move more on my cycle and have a client who's very similar. You know, everyone's different. She comes in and she's like, I'm tired. And I'm like, okay, let's see what we can just do. And in fact, she hits her best numbers in the week of her cycle.
I love that she's showing up.
Yeah.
That's
I
it.
just
She's
love that they're
absolutely showing
showing up.
up. I give her more rest time. We probably do maybe a less set. She gets more rest time, but she pushes hard,
We
and she
are
gets her
actually
best numbers.
strongest
Yeah.
in the week of our period. So it's the bit before where you're at your weakest. But actually,
Yes.
once your period starts, you're actually in your physically strongest part of the month. Usually the caveat is you don't really feel like it.
Yeah.
But physically, you are your strongest. With a lot of clients, I've always got them to track their cycle in quite a lot of detail, because I think the most important thing is awareness, and every woman is going to be really, really different in how they feel at different points in the month. And the reason I get them to track it in detail is because when they can see it in comparison to everything else they're tracking, you know, if they're a client of mine, they're going to be tracking their energy, their sleep,
Yep.
their food, how they feel, their cravings. And so when you actually see where you are in your cycle aligned next to all those data points, you can often see how the trends happen each month for you as an individual. And then when you know that, you can actually prepare for it. So a lot of the time people get extremely high cravings kind of just the week before their period. But if you know that's coming, you can kind of almost mentally prepare yourself. Quite often the reason we actually crave more food just before our period is because our body is burning more energy just existing. You know, a menstrual cycle is actually very taxing on the body. It requires calories. So that's something I often tell my clients, because I think that can actually be quite empowering. Is going, okay, I'm just burning more being here. So, you know, that's why I want to eat cake.
I saw Elisa VT, you know the MyFlow app?
Yes.
Okay. So I think for women younger, like women in their 30s, or all the women coming up are so lucky because everybody's tracking their period right now. Like everybody's tracking their cycle, and all these things, like you just said, Aoife, are so true, right? Like they can start seeing trends. They can start seeing what happens. I used to say, like, I'm in my cinnamon bun phase, Aoife. I really want to, like, I really need to eat a cinnamon bun like every day. You know, but then we were like, okay, let's use that. Let's use that energy while we're in the gym. But I just think this is what's so exciting about younger women coming in, is that they're tracking it, they're more aware, they're more mindful, and they can use that to empower themselves, like you said, Lisa, to train differently, to train better, but to show up for themselves every day. And I think that's awesome. She was saying, to your point about calories, she had this amazing quote. She goes, yes, we need more calories at certain points in the month because we are basically 3D printing an organ every month. Exactly. I loved that quote.
No, because I also think as well, you know, especially when you're like someone, if say you're dieting, I have, like, often most conversation I have with clients is your body is asking for more calories during this week because it needs it. Now, you can have kind of almost two options. We can either eat a little bit more and match what you might need, or if you manage to get through that week, you've definitely gotten a stronger week through. So I see it as like a choice point, rather than going, okay, I can't control my cravings this week, I want to eat a little bit more. Okay, well, let's actually have a little bit more because your body is asking for it. So it's how you always match something to what an individual might need in that time. And I think even especially when it comes to hormones, all women are so different, and that's why it's really hard to even generalize, I think, a lot of the time about a lot of these things, because no two women experience their period the same.
No.
And so no two women are going to experience their menopause the same. So it's really going to be something that's so uniquely individual. It's why you have to learn yourself, and actually get really in touch with your body and how you feel, rather than necessarily taking on a lot of the negative that you might hear outside. I think that's a big one for you, Lisa, was because you had quite a pleasant experience. But I think it's because you didn't spend a lot of time absorbing a lot of that negativity around it, and actually you really empowered yourself throughout that process. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think, you know, if doctors could not prescribe hormone replacement therapy, the three things they would prescribe are exercise, nutrition, and stress management. Now, it's really hard. I think only 8% of women do all three. Because behavior change is the hardest thing. But you just need to start with one thing, right? You just need to start with that one thing. And when I look back at my menopause experience, I look back and I go, why did I have it a little bit easier than why am I not recognizing myself in these news articles about your life going into decline and how awful it's going to be? I'm like, oh, because there was a stage before that I started exercising well. I started eating better. I started practicing breath work. Like, I was just personally interested in it because, as I said, my journey began with, I'm just feeling meh. Yeah. And I don't feel like myself anymore. And so I think this is a great, I think if you could do this regime, and you guys kind of offer that holistic package, if women do need to go on HRT, they may require less. You know, if they do choose to go on it, I think if you have these other things in place, you may need less HRT going forward. And that's something really interesting for women now who don't want to put a lot of toxins and different things into their body.
And I think in terms of time, I actually think you're a very good example. You know, I think people think, oh, you know, my perimenopause is happening now, like maybe it's too late for me to start. But you actually started, we didn't know at the time, but you started during. And then you had your menopause while training with me. And so it's like you experienced the benefits from it quite quickly into starting it. And I think that's something that's really important to remember is, you know, there isn't really a point of you go, oh, I missed the boat with this now, you know, maybe next life. I actually think it's something that pretty much wherever you are in that journey, you are going to feel the benefit from it. and your body is definitely going to thank you in the long run.
It's never too late to start. I've got a couple of clients who started 50. I think they started training in their 50s, following, and I think you will still be able to have a benefit. You'll still see so much improvement if you just get started. I think that's probably the biggest thing I've heard on people reflecting on their journeys is like they wish they started earlier, but actually getting started, they're reporting so many more benefits than just turning up and going, which is really, really important.
What about your client?
For example, I worked with a wonderful lady, Ronnie, and I think we caught kind of like the tail end of it, sort of. And I think the biggest ones we realised was the improvements in how she felt was it was a psychological improvement. Because when we had a goal of actually improving her physical strength, physical capacity, what she could do, and as she lost more and more and more weight, she actually started feeling the benefit of what she could do. And that in turn actually made her feel far more confident about what she could do, how she could feel about herself. And I think that stuck with me, and I actually spoke about that, I think a while ago, is that was one of the biggest things that really, really stuck with me is like, what can strength training do for women in terms of how they feel about themselves and how their confidence improves. And I think we've had conversations about this as well. And Aoife, we've talked about this. It can be so empowering. And that's the biggest thing, obviously, that I've heard. And I understand it from, my perspective, because you feel better when you get stronger because you're working towards a goal and you feel the benefit of obviously achieving that. But I hands down think that's the most common thing that I hear from people is just what it can do to make you feel better about like what you do, how you look, how you feel about yourself. And this is why we espouse the benefits of it all the time.
I think one of the cool things we do, like, we know people want to come in and build muscle and lose fat, and sometimes in perimenopause and menopause, with all the chaos that's going on in the brain, like focusing on that number can be so frustrating when you're going through the daily fluctuations. So we always set performance goals, right? So we choose 3 particular movements, like a lower body and upper body push pull, and we monitor them. So say when you first come in after X amount of weeks, we'll do a little video of you doing them, and we'll monitor your progress maybe 6 to 8 weeks later. And that's widely empowering when you see where you started and like, 12 weeks later, I'm now pushing 11 kg shoulder press. And a lot of women come in being like, I want upper body strength. So being able to watch that progress is hugely empowering. So we take away a little bit from just staring at the scales and the scale number and focus on them performance numbers in the gym as well.
And I was like, I'm not gonna do this photo shoot. Like I'm not that egotistical, but Aoife was like, just for you to see what you've accomplished.
Yeah.
And building on what you're saying, Lisa, the very first picture they took was of the back of me. And Aoife always says the back of me is the best part of me. It's never the front, of course. It's the back I can't see. Anyway, he held up the photo to me, and I couldn't even believe it. Like, I couldn't believe that was me. And I think that is, you touched on this, Harry, with your clients. It is so empowering for women, and they see that. And in the short amount of time you're able to accomplish that, that makes them then go on to, like you said, eat better, move more. I think I almost cried because I'm like, is that me? Is that really what I look like?
That's your work. That's what you've put in. That's those hours that you're giving to yourself every single day or every other day, right?
It's a gift. It's a gift for sure.
And I think the other really empowering kind of factor, a lot of that, is actually looking at something like, damn, I look really hot. Because I think a lot of the time when women go through their perimenopause, their sex hormones are declining. Yeah. So actually feeling sexy is something that they kind of losing that attachment to. So actually to see yourself and be like, wow, I look great, I think is a really important thing for a woman as they're going through perimenopause, because, they might be feeling like not so feminine anymore. And actually to be able to reclaim that femininity, I think, is a really kind of additional factor that maybe isn't talked about so much.
I think you're right. And for anybody listening, get your husband to do it as well, because then you both look hot. I can also vouch for that. But I think everything we're talking about, and listen, this has moved me and changed me so much that I started a business around it. I launched a podcast and a business called Menopositive to show women that there is a more positive, proactive approach to managing your menopause, and that pain and decline is not your destiny. And that's how passionate I am about it. And I think I want younger women to know that you can start now. You can prepare your body. You're good. Menopause is inevitable. It's like Christmas and New Year's. Everybody's going to go through it. And what happens is we know it's coming, but we never do anything about it.
Yeah.
So if I can tell anybody anything, it's like start where you are. If you're 50, it's fine. Just wherever you are, you can start. Your diet is modifiable. Your exercises are modifiable. But you can start building up your strength, building up your resilience so that you can have a more positive perimenopause and menopause experience.
Well, we spend 30% of our life in menopause, so why not prep yourself for a 30% of an awesome life rather than a not so awesome life?
I do find it something interesting that I've found, and with like clients kind of maybe approaching that sort of age group or around the 35 plus mark, where it is actually something you need to start thinking about and not wanting to think about it. So I've had quite a lot of kind of pushback over the years of like, oh, it's not for me to worry about yet. And I think something that's really important to realise is we actually enter like our pre-perimenopause at 35. So actually it does start happening much, much younger than we have in our head. You know, the perimenopause is when our hormones are actually fluctuating to the point we're now feeling symptoms. Mm-hmm. But prior to that, they've already started fluctuating. You know, quite often by 35, we start ovulating every other month. So we actually are having quite a big fluctuation before we even might see it on a blood test or feel it in our symptoms. And that's the time we already want to be really at least starting.
And with all the talk about longevity right now, I mean, you know, we're talking a little bit about menopause here, and midlife, but this is why I like broadening this conversation kind of from like 30 to 70, because we're all saying longevity, but what are we living longer for? Like, why bother? You know, the conversation is moving into health span. Like, if you're going to live longer, you want to live healthier longer.
You want a quality of life.
Yeah, so we're talking about menopause today, but these are really just table stakes for you to live longer, healthier.
No one want to live to like 120, but not be able to move for the last 30 of those years. You know, and I think that's a really important one. I think I saw something years ago where they're saying like, you know, people are going to be expected to live into their hundreds. But if you're living into your hundreds, but you're kind of got the mobility of someone who's in their hundreds for most of that time, I don't think it's going to be particularly a pleasurable experience. Mm-hmm. If I'm going to live to 120, I'd much rather be at least much closer to as physically fit as I was in my younger life, reaching that point, than be kind of bedridden for the last 30 odd years. So I think that's really kind of, it's maximizing life, but actually doing the life in that time, not just maximizing life to not move.
And I think today's episode for you is very gender specific, because that is different. That is, hormones are one of the major differentials between men and women and how they affect us. And that fluctuation that begins at 35 is a massive impact on us versus, you know, how men's testosterone only drops about 3%.
It's gradual decline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's the big differentiator, and why, you know, you've dedicated this episode to talk about women's health and longevity overall.
Because it's the fluctuation that makes us feel bad during perimenopause. It's not the fact that the hormones are just declining. It's actually the fact that they are declining in this kind of up and down sort of cycle, and that's what makes it feel very volatile from a symptom side. You know, imagine how much you kind of go up and down throughout a month as a woman anyway during your menstrual cycle, and then that hormonal wave gets bigger, and so that kind of extreme of like high to low, as you would have normally felt during your cycle, now starts to become this big wave. And so it is very, very different to how men experience hormones, full stop. You know, I think it's something that actually men and women can never really fully relate to each other, because we are constantly going through this cycle for 28 days or to 31, where day 1 is not going to feel the same as day 5, and day 8 is not going to feel the same as day 10. And you could do everything right quite often as a woman. You know, you could sleep well, eat well, and, you know, have good stress management, and you can wake up in the morning and feel absolutely terrible, and there'll be no real explainable reason for it. And vice versa, you could have maybe not kind of half-assed it and woken up and feeling great. So we're quite used to not necessarily feeling a direct impact from our actions on a day-to-day basis, which I think is very, very different for guys. They will often, you know, they eat well, sleep well, do all the right things. You wake up in the morning and it's pretty much a reflection of your actions the day before, where for us it's not always that clear cut. And I think that is something that we do experience really, really differently, and that conversation does need to be had, because so we can often relate to each other, I think, a little bit better.
I think that's really important. I think that's one of the more important things that we could kind of work on, is just having guys understand not necessarily like what it actually feels like to go through like cycles of menopause, because that just wouldn't help, but having a level of empathy for and sympathy for actually understanding kind of what you're going through in terms of how you feel at each given point. Because I think that's where we get it so wrong, and it's never a case of like not wanting to understand, because we do, we just don't. And I think that's where we need to really, really start pushing the kind of narrative to help men understand actually how that happens, and kind of like what you're feeling at any given point.
I think that's a great point, and my advice to other trainers in the gym, or even just partners, is just ask questions. Be open to having the conversation. You know, we can laugh and make jokes about menopause, but don't laugh at it.
No.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no.
And I think that's the best you can do, because you will never know what that experience is like.
No.
You know, I can explain a hot flash to you. I think somebody has actually made vests for men to try so that they can experience what it's like to have a hot flash.
There is
Oh no!
Yeah, that would be
I
like.
feel that one coming on already.
Yeah.
there is a
Oh, no.
there's also a period cramp simulator that if you see on the socials, girls have been getting it for their boyfriends so they understand what they mean by the spasms, and they're like attaching it to right here, and then they're just pressing it whenever they want. So they'll be in the middle of like, I don't know, sipping their drink, and they're pressing it, and these boys are spasming and throwing their water, and the girls are like, this is what it's like, but we just carry on.
Well, yeah, we get kind of used to like grinning and bearing it. I
Yeah.
think, quite a lot of the time.
You know, I
it is
think that's
that.
an absolute myth. I think whether you're 14 or 45, you know, as soon as girls start having their period and they get cramps, they're told that's normal.
Yeah.
And when you're 45 and you're starting to feel kind of like a bit, you're going crazy, or you're having some pain, they're like, that's normal. It's not normal, and it's a myth, and there are things to help you. Like, no woman has to suffer, and exercise is one thing, eating is another thing, or there's hormone replacement therapy, or there's vaginal estrogens. Like, whatever it is, there is something to solve every one of those symptoms for people.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, we have probably been often encouraged to just suffer along with it.
I would agree with that.
And it is nice to see that I think is changing. Generally, I think we are kind of looking more to go, actually, how can we support women? Like, one of the things that got me into being a trainer in the very first place was actually learning how little we'd studied women's health. It was many years ago, but it was kind of first getting into weight training and then starting to read research and realize that we'd actually not even looked at women at all for a very, very, very long time. And it's only really in the last kind of like 10, 15 years that they've even started to look at women in studies and not just assumed that they were little men. And so this is something that I'm very passionate about, is actually we quite often had been just allowed to maybe suffer, especially even just with how we approached training or how we approached our nutrition, but not because we needed to, but because no one had ever actually really looked at it and seen how much that differs and what you might need to do for that difference. You know, we like to kind of say like people are, you know, all the same, but actually the hormonal differences between men and women means we require quite different support.
And are you guys still finding, I mean, I moved, like I always had some kind of a movement or mobility practice like all my life, but I have so many friends that are afraid to come into the gym because, you know, I don't want to get bulky. Is this like something you hear all the time?
Yeah.
Because I can tell you, I've been training with you guys for about 5 years, and I had no shoulders when I started. I got shoulder pads on right now, but I said to Eva, I'm like, you really need to fix my shoulder. It's been 5 years. I mean, I am not super broad, but I have shoulders, and they're really nice now. But you know, it's taken a really long time to get them.
But that's the perfect example of you've been training for 5 years and you are not bulky in the slightest. So it is dispelling that myth that testosterone is a male hormone, but it's not. We just have different doses. That's the biggest difference. Like the amount of women that come in through that consultation process and you're having their first meeting with them and you're like, what do you want to look like? And you're like, they're like, toned, but I don't want to be bulky. And I'm like, okay. And then you kind of just have to explain a little bit, because they're so believing of this bulkiness that's going to happen in the gym. And after like 6 months of training, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm not bulking. I'm like, because it doesn't make you bulky. It's never going to make you bulky.
And you're going to get more bulky if you just keep eating hamburgers.
Yeah.
Like,
that's
that's not a nice bulky. That is not a nice bulky.
Yeah. That's like, if you want to bulk, please keep eating that and coming training, then you will.
As someone who used to be into bodybuilding, no one gets bulky by accident. It took me a lot of effort to actually even get slightly bulky. So it's not something that no one really accidentally builds muscle, because it requires so much work to build quite a small amount of muscle. And so much of that's going to be kind of beholden to your diet as well. Like if you're kind of overeating, then training, then you're going to put fat tissue on top of your muscle, and you might look a bit bulky. Like I have a little saying that I like to say to clients, which is like ballerina or bodybuilder, and that is going to depend on how you're eating. So if you want to look like a ballerina, then maybe you might want to be looking at your nutrition, making sure that you're eating right for your size. If you want to look like a bodybuilder, then we're going to have to look at getting your calories up, because it's going to take quite a lot of calorie surplus over time to put on a substantial amount of muscle tissue. No one gets bulky by accident. Or a lot of more people would be walking around looking like bodybuilders, and bodybuilders wouldn't have much of a career. So I think, that's a really big one. And I think as well, don't be afraid of building muscle as well. Like actually having a bit of tissue is very empowering. I think before I started training, I used to be quite scared of the idea of getting bulky myself. I worked in the gym, and I, would see kind of like these like big jacked women, and I was like, oh no, I don't want to look like that. But actually the more I got into training, the less I really cared. And actually I started to like having muscle, and I liked feeling strong, and I liked how it made me feel. And I think that's when you actually like how you feel inside, the kind of having a little bit of extra tissue might not be something that you've got that much of a problem with, because it's cool. You know what it can do.
I think strong is the new skinny.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And, the other thing I learned from you guys was I think, listen, the Wright program is the one that somebody is ready to commit to every day. But there were some killer insights that I've learned from you guys. So one was progressive overload. So if you're sitting at home and doing that 5K dumbbell like over and over and over again for like a couple years, you're not going to build more muscle. And let's remember, the objective of building the muscle is to make stronger bones and a stronger body, so that we don't run into that hip fracture situation we were talking about, right? So you can still put your suitcase at the top of, the airplane when you're in your 70s or 80s. So the progressive overload point was important. Just when it gets easy, like you guys always made it harder, but people can do that at home.
Yeah, you go stronger.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can do that with a push-up, right? Yeah. It doesn't have to be with a machine. I think what else? You can't out-train a bad diet. So that was really important in kind of, calories in, calories out. But I learned, I didn't have to eat less. Like my girlfriends were like, oh my God, I see people dieting and they're not eating anything. But you, like Lisa, your plate is full. It's because I learned what the right foods were to put on my plate. So I was never hungry. There was always the right thing there. And the other thing, I just want to say, if you are a woman that wants those like really nice cut arms, so that's actually muscle. That's not dieting. That's not getting skinny. Like Aoife was like, well, Lisa, that's because we built some muscle tissue here, and then we built some muscle tissue here, and that's created that nice cut in your arm. So killer insight, ladies. If you want those nice ripped arms, you need some muscle.
And that's the toned look, though, that people go on about. So
not bulk.
Not bulk, it's toned. That is essentially it. You have to put muscle on to look toned.
I always said being toned is a myth. Like the actual word, word toned is like, it's not a real thing. It's often describing kind of two things that have happened simultaneously, which is someone has built muscle and then they've lost body fat so you can see the muscle, and that's being toned. But it's actually not one unique process where you go, okay, I'm going to go tone up in the gym. I've always back in earlier days of my career, I used to always have a real anger when someone said tone up, because I'm like, it's not a real thing. It's like a made up concept of like multiple things happening together that look like something. But actually being toned often is having muscle tissue and then not having excessive body fat covering it.
The other thing I learned, because we've talked a lot about diet as well, and I was speaking to a nutritionist the other day, and I mean, I know I have friends talking about this, and you guys must have clients, like they can't drink the same, like if they're drinking alcohol, it has a different effect on them, like, or their hangovers are worse. And I learned that, you know, obviously, again, as your hormones are fluctuating, your metabolism is changing. Like where you hold weight, you probably have women coming in a lot going, it seems to be around my middle,
the redistribution.
Right? But she was explaining that how, you know, the liver function actually slows down, so you're not able to detoxify the alcohol in the same way you used to, which is why the hangovers are worse. And I think that's another thing that's really interesting, probably when you are speaking to your female clients, is just understanding how those hormone shifts are affecting their insulin resistance, how they're affecting how they metabolize food, and then how their liver can detoxify things. I know Aoife always used to say to me, she's like, Lisa, if you go out drinking, your liver's going to like detoxify the toxins first before it does the fat. And, you know, so it was, I think that's something interesting for people to understand, and for your clients to understand what's changing within them and why modifying their diet is important and can help.
I actually think alcohol is a really big one, because I've had quite a few people that I know personally and with clients who, once they started their perimenopause, they now cannot drink. It's like it has such a negative impact on how they feel the next day. And so I think it's really interesting to look at how your body really struggles to process it during that time. And quite often women, for stress management, often gear towards drinking during perimenopause. So actually finding another outlet for that energy and finding another soother, I think, is really, really important, because your body doesn't really love alcohol during perimenopause. And I know quite a few women who've actually had to stop drinking completely during their perimenopause because they find it has such a kind of direct influence on how they feel for the next few days.
Yeah, it's not even a day, it's a few days afterwards. But also, if you're in perimenopause and you're drinking, it's only going to exacerbate them symptoms. You're already struggling to sleep, so alcohol's going to make that worse. You're already getting hot flashes, alcohol's going to make that worse. So it is, just like you said, is finding another outlet.
Yeah, there are so many menopause and perimenopause symptoms that can also be linked back to the gut. So because you combine the nutrition program with the physical part of the program, I know for me, again, I really credit that for helping me have a more positive and easier experience, because I started eating so clean and making my gut so healthy that the symptoms were really minimized. And I think there's so much more science now on like microbiome and gut health, and the combination of those two things together, I think, are really important for women to understand.
I guess for us, we push what we say is the basics. The basics work. You don't need anything fancy. If you're trying to lose fat, it's a calorie deficit, and we push food volume. So like your plate is full of vegetables, and then you've got it portioned equally with your protein and a bit of your starchy carb. And that's why when you were saying when you were going away on your girls' holiday, and they were like, "Oh, you're eating so much food," it's the food volume. So you don't have to diet on what looks like bird food. You're eating good food, nutritious food.
Yeah.
So
you're so right. I mean, there isn't a silver bullet. And I was at this conference recently, and it was full of biohackers and doctors and longevity scientists, and it all comes back down to the basics.
Yeah.
Exercise, nutrition, stress management.
exactly that.
No, I think there's I was speaking to a friend who'd watched our previous episode, and he goes, I really enjoyed the podcast, but he goes, some of the things you're saying, he's like, these are really like basic things. And I'm like, yeah, but this is the point. It's actually, we so often really overcomplicate training, nutrition, and actually it's quite often it's just repeating the basics again and again and again. And that's really where the magic happens. It's not in the fancy stuff, it's in doing the simple every day. And so much of like what we encourage is, You know, it doesn't have to be 1,000 different things. It's actually just focus on 5 things and do them really, really well. It's the way we approach training in the gym. You know, it's not do 100 exercises when you come into that training session. It's we've picked 6 things and we're going to make sure you absolutely ace those 6 things and absolutely ace every single rep of those 6 things, rather than trying to do loads of different things and kind of half-arsing them. I think nailing the basics is kind of actually the center point of what we do at UP, is actually just really hammering how much doing the simple stuff over time is really where the results happen. Like, that's where all our results happen. It's nailing those basics every day.
Maybe one of the biggest challenges with perimenopause is, yes, we talk about nailing the basics, but because of the chaos in the brain and the estrogen up and down, like, how can we help you better in that? So we spoke about this earlier, is we talk about setting your calorie, so what you should be in a deficit to lose weight. And we spoke about how different every single day is. So having a calorie range is going to work better, because you might be in the lower end and nailing it, and suddenly you're having the craziest day, stressed, you've not slept. And what do you do when you've not slept? You want to eat more. So having that calorie range to play around with, so you've got a higher end day where you've not slept more and your body actually wants that bit more food, have it. So then you've got this kind of like a scales, right? You're balancing it out rather than just going one way. So in terms of perimenopause and the chaos, that's one way of sort of adapting the nutrition to, I was going to say you guys, us guys, because I count in that as well.
No, I definitely have had a few different kind of methods of approaching diet, and not necessarily exactly having the exact same thing every day, but actually creating a bit of flexibility for life, like one that's quite popular with a few of my ladies who are in perimenopause. So I call it the weekend offender. And it's where I just give them slightly higher calories on what they, 2 select days that they've picked across the week. Say it's their date night or it's Saturday, and it's kind of 2 days where they know I might go out for a meal today. And it's just adding that little bit of flexibility where you're giving permission. Because I think quite a lot of the time where people really struggle with dieting is it's a bit like don't touch the wet paint. They've told themselves, I can't have this, I can't have that, I can't eat this many calories, I can't eat a slice of pizza. And because we've given us so much I can't, now all you want to do is can. So actually when you create an allowance, when you actually go, okay, let's plan for this, or let's include this in what you're doing, it actually stops being that exciting. Like I had a conversation with a client very recently where I was like, you know, within your day, kind of that little like last 20%, you can have what you like. She was like, I want to have a cookie. And I was like, you can have what you want with that 20%. Because if I say don't have that cookie, all you're going to do is think, I really, really, really want that cookie. Where if I'm now gone have it, she's like, I don't really want it anymore. And I'm like, exactly. Yeah. It's because you kind of take away that idea of like scarcity or like, I can't. It actually takes a lot of that pressure off.
You used to tell me, because I'd be like, my cinnamon bun example, it was actually a scone at one point, the dark cherry scone. The dark chocolate and cherry scone at Gale's.
Good choice.
Yes, thank you very much. And I would message Aoife, because I'd be like, God, I really want that scone, Aoife. And so when I have the craving, I leave it. I try to leave it for as long as I possibly can, like day 1. And then day 2. And then I'm telling Aoife, and then Aoife finally says, just have the scone, Lisa. Because actually the stress of me not allowing myself the scone is causing, that's all I'm thinking about is the scone. Yeah. And you know what? Tomorrow's a new day. And tomorrow I'll have less calories.
Quite often as well, I say, if you've had a craving for, I like who you went for days, but have you had a craving for a kind of a decent amount of time, like it's been going on all day, or it's gone into multiple days, I would say have the thing that you are looking to have, because quite often the actions you'll take to avoid having that thing tend to be worse. So I know when in my kind of own experience of dieting is like, oh, I really want a brownie. And so I go, oh, let me go to the supermarket, and you find like, you know, a Fiber One bar or something, and you have one of those, and you're like, that's just not hit the spot. So then you have another one, or you have something else to, again, try and kind of satisfy this craving. You're like, again, I've still not quite had what I was looking to have. Often just have the brownie, because if anything, yes, it's maybe like 400 or so calories, but you've probably now consumed about 600 trying to avoid having the brownie.
So true.
And so it's just better to have the thing than spend the whole day skirting around it. Obviously, if the craving's only been going on for like 5-10 minutes, just try and sit it out for a little bit. But if it has been going on for, you know, kind of a decent amount of time where it's like you now find yourself reaching for other things because nothing's quite hit that spot, Just have the thing you originally wanted to have. It's not going to hurt you.
Well, I also learned like sometimes your hunger is boredom.
Yes.
So you also gave me the tip, like when you're hungry, like if I know I've had my breakfast or my lunch, like drink water, and then that usually satisfies it actually, because you're probably more dehydrated than really hungry.
Always the case.
Yeah, and so that really helps. Always having a bottle of water near you, and that actually helps a lot too.
Check in and see what drives it as well. See what drives that kind of like thought of hunger, because I think that's pretty normal. Is you can go through, you eat a sufficient amount of calories at your breakfast, as you're saying, and then you've got a really stressful morning, and you're thinking, oh God, I could really eat, but actually it probably is a reaction to something that isn't necessarily hunger. And I think it's a really good way of just thinking, okay, what is actually going on? What do I need right now? And it's probably going to be something that's a little bit more, I need to go for a walk. I need to take myself out of this situation, just calm down. I need to de-stress a little bit, and then you can go back in. And usually it goes, as Aoife, you were saying, is 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes of that real intensity of going, I need to eat something. It does go, it dissipates, and then you're not consuming the calories. And then before you know it, you're kind of like back to normal.
I love that idea, because that's kind of, again, a moment of mindfulness. Like if you can, and we don't do enough of that, do we? Like just to check in with ourselves.
Trainers don't.
Yeah, no, I love that idea. I love that idea. So next
not
time,
me.
just take a minute.
That's me. I'm joking. How many conversations have we had about this before?
But I think so many people are rushing through their day. That we never take a few minutes to actually think about that. And you're right. You could stop and go, okay, what's going on? Okay, yeah, like I'm really stressed, or I'm really this, or am I really hungry, or am I just tired? Like what is it? I'm gonna try that.
It's hard to do. It's hard to initially start doing, because you have to consciously do it and you have to consciously practice, but it does become a little bit easier.
That awareness.
But it is tough to actually start doing. I will admit that one.
So I have a little one that I do with some clients for that sort of thing, and I call it the plate rule. And it's just a very, very simple, if you're going to have any rule, this is the rule, is every time you eat something, you have to sit down properly and put it on a plate. And this encourages a level of mindful eating, because quite often when we eat, when we're stressed or when we're like uncomfortable, it's often reaching in the cupboard, kind of nestling in, having a mouthful of that, or have a little nibble of that. And actually, if you go, okay, I'm going to have that, but I'm going to sit down and I'm going to put it on a plate, you're now going to take a step to stop and think. And you're like, do I really want it? Am I actually hungry? And can I be bothered to even wash up this plate after? And if you can't be bothered to wash up the plate after, you're not that hungry. And so I think it's a really simple way of just encouraging mindfulness. It's not necessarily saying everything you eat has to be on a plate, but it's encouraging you to go, let me stop, let me think, and actually let me process how I feel right now before I then go to eat. And if I really want it, I can put it on the plate.
You know what? I think that is so common. I mean, men and women, but we're all running around and, like, I always call it one-handed food. Like, we're all just grabbing something and eating it. I find myself standing in the kitchen, eating, standing up. It was actually one of the problems in how I was eating originally, because I was eating and snacking and eating and snacking and eating and snacking, that what I learned was I wasn't giving my gut a break. So my gut didn't know when to start metabolizing the food. And that, I mean, that's another top tip, right? And, you know, if you sit down and you have your 3-4 full meals and you sit down properly and you're not scrolling or you're not doing emails, or it's not, I mean, we all sit and have it beside our desk, you know, if you're working in an office. But it was literally something that was holding me back, because it was taking me 2 hours to eat my lunch, because it was sitting beside me while I was doing something else, that my brain wasn't sending messages down that it's time to metabolize. So I couldn't lose weight. So it's another interesting.
Grazing is usually one of the biggest things to lead to weight gain. So it's actually like grazing patterns are very, very highly connected with gaining weight. And it's quite often because we're mindless. You're eating in these kind of short bursts, so you never really get that sensation of fullness. And it's quite easy to really overconsume when you're not really thinking about it. When you actually sit, I often say it's very hard to overeat in a meal, but it's very easy to overeat when you snack. And so something I do with a lot of clients is I get them to track their snacks as one meal. Because when you see how much that totals up in comparison to any of your meals across the day, you realise it wasn't that burger you had at lunch that actually caused you to go up. It quite often was all those little nibbles you had throughout the day when you had kind of a spoonful of your kid's plate, and then you grabbed a handful of nuts when you went to the cupboard. And it's like, it's all those little bits often tend to be the things that actually are really adding up. And it's the kind of big main things, the things that you actually enjoy, they're still fine to be there. It's those little bits that you probably didn't even enjoy that much. You didn't even really want them, but because you just weren't really thinking about what you were having and it just became about convenience, you haven't really like taken the time to kind of make an intelligent decision within that moment.
You told me the story of a client who was saying, but I'm tracking everything and I haven't lost any weight.
It's about myself.
No, what, the cappuccino?
Oh, no.
No, you said there was a woman, she loved she had 3 cups of coffee or 3 cappuccinos or something a day. But she stopped tracking them because she thought it was just a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The milk.
But
What about the milk?
But she was having, you said, and I know you say to me when I'm not losing weight, you're like, Lisa, you need to start tracking again because there's something sneaking in there. Like you should be. And you had a client that she was having a 3rd or 4th cappuccino and that was adding whatever, I don't know, 400 calories.
No, sorry, you're right. It was, I had someone, they'd been very meticulous the whole way through. And then all of a sudden we kind of hit this point where things aren't moving, and we'd gone through everything. We went through her trackers, we looked at how she was weighing everything, and for ages we just couldn't figure out what this thing was and why she wasn't making the progress she was. And then one day she comes in, she turns to me and she goes, oh my God, I just realised I just one day stopped putting my coffee in. And so, yeah, she was having about 3 cappuccinos a day, which was totaling about 600 calories. And so it was quite a massive difference for something that felt so small and kind of insignificant across the day. But that was the thing that was hindering her progress. And again, it was something that wasn't actually that important to cut off. And I think that's often why, tracking calories is not necessary for everyone, but I do think it's a really good place to start nutrition-wise, just because it educates you. Like, I think so often we just don't really understand what we're eating, or we haven't really looked at it, or we don't really understand portion size. And actually just having a period of time where you track your food and you actually start to understand what your plate needs to look like. And also those things that you might be having all the time that are kind of not really adding much significance to your life, but they are actually hindering you in the ways that you want to be making progress. So I think that kind of like at least doing like maybe even just a month or so of it can be really, really educational for a lot of people to learn kind of what they actually want to be having in their day. And then also you can learn the things that you like to have and how you can fit them in. So I think it adds that degree of flexibility, because I think a lot of people just think, if I want to, lose weight, I just have to eat like fish and broccoli every day and that's all I can have. And actually you can quite often still lose weight while including things that you enjoy. And sometimes your adherence to that diet's better if you find a way to include things you enjoy. I did a diet many years ago where I would have like half a muffin every day, and I included it in my diet, and it was something that I knew I could get through my day if I could have my muffin. So I had everything else, but that kept me consistent. And so often it's whatever going to work for you over time, rather than necessarily going, I have to, follow this kind of bodybuilder's diet for the next 12 weeks. It's finding what works for you as an individual. And if you are kind of going through that hormonal change, learning that you might need to treat your diet slightly differently at different aspects of the month. So women, their bodies use carbs or fat as fuel at different parts of the month. So sometimes you might find you're craving more carbohydrates and it's a time to have a little bit more carbs in your diet. There are other times where you find, I don't really need that. And that's actually where you might be wanting to include more kind of healthy fats in your diet. So it's usually just kind of like just after your period, you start to use fat more as fuel. And so that's why your kind of appetite starts to drop down a little bit. And then pre your period, then the carbohydrates start to kick in and you want more carbs. So when you actually start listening to those signals a little bit more, your body does tell you what it needs in the given points in the month. And the more you track that and the more you look at it, I think the easier it is to kind of know what it wants and how to follow that while also working towards what you want to achieve.
Can we address another myth that I think could be really helpful for the female listeners? Fats. Because I think some people think they've just got to get rid of
all the fats.
Yeah. And I think it would be really helpful for people to, women, especially during hormone shifts, actually need healthy fats. And they're there to actually help you create more estrogen in your body.
If you think about the history of dieting and diet culture in general, it's always been about don't eat the fat. I grew up in the era of special K diet, 2 bowls a day and then have your main meal and that's it. That's the diet I did. That's when I first started on. I don't know where the fat in that was. I don't think it was existent. But if I look back at how I was responding to that and actually how ill I ended up, there's probably a good reason behind it. But it's so pushed that we've demonized fats, when in actual fact, we need a healthy amount. I can't remember the percentage. I don't know whether it's like 25 to 35. Like if you're balancing out your carbs, your fat and your protein, that's a good level to have. But people are so fearful of it, when really it's just if you're over consuming anything, whether it's protein, whether it's carbs, whether it's fat, you're going to gain.
Fat's really important for hormone production as well. Our bodies use a lot of fat for hormone production. And if we're talking about the decline of hormone production and we're reducing fat intake, it's going to exacerbate any issues that you might be experiencing. I think I appreciate there's a lot of like conflicting information, because they're also told not to eat carbohydrates because they make us fat as well. Can we address that one as well?
Yeah, but I always tell people there are healthy
just
carbs.
Insane how much noise there is, and it is geared more towards females, unfortunately, because I think with us we don't have anywhere near as much. And this is certainly one thing I hear all the time. It's like, do I eat more fat, less fat? Do I eat more carbs, less carbs? Fat's going to make me fat. Carbs are going to make me fat. And it's like, okay, I'm going to take both of them out. It's like, right, well, let's see what happens. And then, they do that for a couple of weeks. It's like, okay, that doesn't work. And it's like, right, how can we move this along and just give you an idea of like how to effectively eat that's going to support your body? I think it is also a caveat that I was reading the SWAN study, which is actually quite interesting. Is they're talking about kind of make nutrition specific to the individual. You can almost like customize your nutrition intake. So it's almost an erroneous point saying you need more fats or more carbs because you don't know. And much like Aoife, you were saying, is like as you go through different points in your cycle, you're going to need different numbers anyway. Yeah. And it's where we talk about the data collection. Is like if you have data and collect it over a period of time, you can start influencing these choices with your clients, with yourselves. Which will then kind of give you a bit more of an understanding as like how does the food that you're eating actually fuel and help your body, which I think is really, really important for anyone to know, but especially if you're seeing such big shifts in hormones.
Well, something I often do with clients is I say, look at your kind of like your calorie intake and your protein intake and try and keep that part at least consistent. But then throughout the month, actually like undulate between your carbs and your fats. You might find that you want more of one during some weeks and want more of the other, and it's actually follow that instinct because your body is telling you what it needs. Our bodies are actually very intelligent, and they do let us know what they want if we know how to listen to it. I also think when it comes to fats is just I often set my clients a minimum, so I go like try not to let that number drop below like often 50 grams, because we have been instructed for a very long time that if you want to lose weight, you've got to have low fat everything. And something I found myself throughout my life is I actually find a lot of like kind of low fat foods, like low fat yogurt, can actually be really quite upsetting on the gut. And actually from a gut health perspective, I, in the last few years, have recently encouraged my clients to have like a full fat yogurt. Because often you're more satiated after you eat it, so you actually feel fuller.
Just tastes nicer as well.
Yeah,
it tastes so much better.
Just so much better.
And it actually sits much nicer in your stomach. So like the kind of like the Greek yogurt, the Fage one. If you have the 5% versus the 0%, they are like completely worlds apart. And the calorie difference isn't that big, where it's enough to say, you know what, you could maybe sacrifice something a little else in the day to just have that full fat version, and actually you often feel a lot more satisfied afterwards. So something I've worked on a lot with my clients is not demonizing those kind of like fatty foods. The thing you have to be conscious of, though, if you are having fats, is they are much more calorie dense for their kind of square meter. So that, the amount of kind of real estate you get for your calories is pretty small. And that's just something that you have to kind of bear in mind when you're having fats is do measure them, because it's very, very easy to overconsume, especially with things like oils. It's very easy to just like, tip it that little bit more and you've added like, 300 calories. So it's like, it's something you don't want to measure probably above the other things that you're measuring. But you definitely don't want to be cutting it out. Carbohydrates do have a little bit more of a flip side because you can survive without carbohydrates. So if you had to cut anything, they are the one to cut out. But I also think you really need those for your training and you need those for your energy. So all your macronutrients are important. Like nothing really should ever be cut out. You might just have to modify where you cut from. But fats, I think, are vital.
I think there's a lot of confusion about like a starchy carb, and there's different, like, there, to me, I always say there's healthy carbs, like like vegetables are carbs, right? But then you have bread, like they kind of all fall in the same classification sometimes, and that's what people get really confused about. But to me, I'm just like, oh no, the vegetables are carbs, so that's how I look at those versus starchy carbs like rice and bread and potato. Am I saying those the right way?
So you need both in your diet, realistically, for different aspects of digestion.
But the calorie of, like...
But how your body uses those calories is different. So like a non-starchy carbohydrate, because it's much higher in fibre, your body can't actually digest fibre, so it taxes your digestive system to try and break it down, which burns a little bit of calories. So like, kind of like some foods, they're almost like energy neutral or carbon neutral, however you want to word it, where the amount of calories it takes your body to consume to actually break it down is almost as many as it's consumed. So like lettuce is quite, I think, a good example of that.
Crunchy water.
It's like mostly water, and the amount of calories you burn just digesting it often cancels out how many calories you consumed from it. So it's a kind of net zero. But you still want to have a combination of like starchy and non-starchy carbs in your diet. Because both are going to have an impact on your digestion. Like if your stools are too loose, then you want to make sure you're having more kind of fibrous, non-starchy carbs in your diet, and vice versa. If they're too hard, you want to be having slightly more soluble, starchy carbs in your diet.
And drink your water. Especially if you're eating more fibre.
Yeah,
it'll certainly help pull it through.
I think that's, it's funny. There's so many memes now on Instagram, right? Like, especially for midlife, it's like, get your 10,000 steps in, make sure you're doing your carbs, make sure you eat enough fiber, make sure you're having your flaxseed, make sure and it's become a bit of a joke. Mm-hmm. But I think if women attack this one step at a time, like this year, I kind of made this promise to myself that every quarter I was going to develop a new healthy habit. And, I had a sleep routine for the first 3 months, and then I started something else the next quarter. But you can do the same thing with exercise or diet, right? Like you could say, okay, for the next 4 weeks, just concentrate on your training or whatever. And then for the next 4 weeks, okay, now we're going to build in this element of your diet. And I think what you have seen in your clients is once they start seeing the results and they start feeling better about themselves, they want to do more.
Yeah.
And a lot of women in that phase of life, they don't even know where to start. So just start.
Yeah, I think if you're going to start with anything, actually, to keep it really, really simple, is start with steps. Because I think we often think of, like, when you have the 10,000 steps, we think it's about walking, but it's actually just about movement. So the reason you track steps is just a way to quantify how much you've moved on a day-to-day basis, and it's kind of the easiest way to do it. But it's such a simple way that you kind of don't need anything to start that. You don't need any kind of like special device. You don't need a gym. It's something that you can literally start kind of from that moment. You have the thought of like, I'm going to take action now. Because I think a lot of time when it comes to taking action is we push ourselves to go, I'm going to start tomorrow, or I'm going to start on Monday. And we lose that moment of motivation, because your motivation is like a product of action. We don't randomly get motivated and then go. Quite often we start doing and then we feel motivated. So actually, when you have that moment of like, okay, I feel like I want to do something, I don't say you're listening to this and you're like, I'm going to do something now. Start with going for a walk. It's the easiest thing. And once you kind of tick one box, it's so much easier to then take another step. It's like, it's often just putting your shoes on and getting out the front door is often the hardest part. And once you've taken that one step and you see yourself achieve that one step, I can take another.
It's that when you're trying to take all the steps at once.
Yeah, trying to overcommit and then underdeliver.
That's the one.
And I think the reason why it's really important for male trainers to understand how this is going to work and what goes on and kind of what your female clients are experiencing at any given time is, as we've seen, there are so many things that can actually help, but if there's an attitude where they don't understand and don't have the kind of concepts down as to what is going to be the most important thing for that particular client at any given moment through the transition periods and then through post-menopause, I think it can be a little bit more dangerous with some of the stuff. So one of the main things that we've spoken about is the intensity and the volume of training has to reduce. And if we're really pushing, if we got a female client training 4 times a week, which we do, if that's an hour of really intense work 4 times a week and their bodies physiologically aren't in a position to recover from that, that could be inherently more dangerous than actually just saying, right, we'll do a couple of sessions a week and you go do some steps, some additional cardio, something that's going to wind you down a little bit more and help you recover from the stimulus of training. I think from that perspective, that's going to be kind of like key factor number one. But it's also understanding that, like, from what I've heard and from kind of what's been said to me is you have to be empathetic to changes and fluctuations of mood. I have, on the odd occasion, nearly had my head torn off because I've had client sessions where they are absolutely in the wrong mood for like how I usually am, and I'm a bit dry and I'm a bit of a wind up sometimes, but you just got to know when to have that and then when not, and when not, just absolutely just toe a line. And it's not because it's the wrong approach, and it's not because they don't appreciate it. It's literally because something's going on in that particular moment. And I think it's really important to understand, really get to know your client, because you will pick that up as soon as they walk through the door. You can feel it, you can see it. It's like, right, okay, this is this kind of session, this is what they need in the session, and this is the support I can give them. And then when it settles, they come in and they go, oh, you're an arsehole, thank you. I'm so glad to see you again. Great. Can I leave? It's like, no, we can go do your strength training.
The question that you ask when everybody arrives that morning, like, how are you doing today? Is probably one of the most powerful questions you can ask a woman when she comes in. There's going to be so much information in that. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you get to what's really nice, and this is certainly something that Ryan and I had, is you get to the point where you know that person, and if they tell you, yeah, okay, everything's fine, and you get that sense, you're like, that's bullshit, what's going on? You're fortunate in the sense that they, have enough trust, you've got enough buy-in into the relationship where you go, right, this is what's going on. And it's so much more productive having that conversation before, because then you really set the tone for like the session. And I find that really, really helps. And usually I get it wrong, but I think we're nudging it. We're getting a little bit more accurate, which is good. But I think those are really important things for us to just learn and just be considerate of. And as much as it's saying, is just ask questions. I think that was one thing that I had to learn, is actually just ask. It's not really going to be a taboo subject. And I think it's really important to get an understanding and not just assume. And it might be that, as you said, around kind of like training cycles, it might be actually that could be a really productive session. Just because they're on a cycle doesn't mean that they're necessarily not going to be able to do something. So it's always a case of, right, what have you got today? How are you feeling? Okay, are we going to push it? Are we going to back off? Because I don't think male trainers do that too much. I think they just see and go, this is what's going on today. This is what we're going to do. But I think there needs to be a bit more back and forth. And that happens literally as soon as you walk through the door.
I think it's listening to what your client is ready for is really important.
Oh,
I think sometimes as trainers, the mistake we can make is go, because we want to give them the best service in that time, and you want to push them the hardest they can. But sometimes trainers can actually ignore when their client's saying, look, I'm not for this today, or I don't want to push like that today. And actually, sometimes you do, especially during kind of like phases of like extreme hormonal fluctuations, you need to be quite considerate of that and actually meet your client where they're at on that day. No one's necessarily going to feel the same every session. It's kind of finding that middle ground of, I'm going to push them out their comfort zone. I'm not going to necessarily let them sit back on their haunches in that session, but maybe if they don't need that intensity that day, it's finding that little middle ground between, we're still going to work hard, but we're going to work to what you can do, rather than you're going to work to what I want you to do.
I agree. I do have a client who can be with her mood as well as like her general strength. She knows herself, which is really good. Every single time she comes in, I'm like, right, how is your strength today? And she will be like, TBD. And I'll be like, okay, fine. So we'll get into it. And like second set in, she's like, yeah, let's go for it. Or it's either second set in, body's not there today. And I'm like, okay, fine. We just pull it back a bit.
And training can be an emotional experience. Like I have definitely cried a few times while training. And it is something that can be quite emotional, I think, because you are pushing really hard. If you do have anything going on outside, it can be quite intense. I know you've definitely had some tears in that session.
I cried on the pendulum once.
We all cry on the pendulum. We all cry on that.
Thank you, Matt Ells, for that one.
So yeah, you definitely, I've had moments where I've been really pushing and I just gone, I don't want to do this anymore. And it does happen. And so I also think just actually being considerate to your client in that time in the session, that sometimes, you know, you might see the tears start to well and it's like, okay, come on, let's maybe have a little sit and chat in the side room.
Yeah.
But you're also, I mean, it's kind of like therapy. You're kind of like a great hairdresser as well. Like people can tell you all their secrets too, but I do find it is like therapy. And sometimes even when you are feeling a little emotional that way, when Aoife said to me, like, come on, Lisa, like, you got this.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of coaching as well. And you'd be like, you just felt like somebody was on your side and somebody's on your team. And then that really helps push people through as well. I love what you were saying. You say how, I don't know, what was it?
What's your energy like today?
Because sometimes I've come in and I've been really like, oh God, no, like not good. But then I get going and I'm like, oh no, I'm ready.
Yeah, exactly.
There's some things you just think you just need to like almost warm up into it and actually just get started and see what you can do. Because I think sometimes even before you've started training, you actually have no idea how that session's going to go until you start it. You know, for like even with your own training, I can sometimes have days where I feel absolutely phenomenal and then I start training and it's like, oh no, it's not going to be a good one. And then you get other days where you feel terrible going in, and actually as soon as you get warmed up and you start to feel that kind of like blood rise, you're like, okay, I've got this today. So it's also not necessarily making assumptions on how something starts out, and actually seeing how you go once you get in and start moving and start getting a bit of blood flow can often perk you up on a bad day.
Get those endorphins going.
Exactly.
Was this her point? Was this your point about women are googling like menopause
it was
workout?
okay. That's the one. It's so obviously with social media and that being so heightened nowadays and all the information that's out there, there's so much misinformation. But unfortunately, perimenopausal and menopausal women are kind of a little bit of a target market in like, ooh, here's a menopause workout, or here's some menopause diet that you can do. And it's like, in this moment where you've got all the chaos, I keep talking about the chaos in the brain because it is the chaos in the brain, you're desperately trying to find a solution. And so you're just going to go Google and find a menopause workout or a menopause specific coach, which yes, there are, but do your research around them first. And then it takes you away from what we've said earlier, is it is the basics that work. And that is, like we said, our bread and butter. But again, touching on, I don't know if you've found this in your discussions on your podcast, is how many women have gone through finding a menopause plan that hasn't worked. And then they're like, well, nothing's going to work.
There is definitely something called Meno washing. You know, if
That's
you
a
just
term?
put, it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you just put the word Meno in front of something, shampoo, supplements, exercise regimes, you can charge more. So I think
Pink tax all over again.
It's like the pink tax.
You know, if the world can find a way to capitalize on women's bodies, they will.
Don't make us mad.
But I think every woman is going to go through this differently. And that's why, I mean, we're talking about personalized medicine. This is a personalized plan based on your body, not Susan's body, not Daisy's body, not Karen's body. You're going to work with this person and what works for them to get the results that they want. And that's what makes this so different. But the way I understand it, there are only so many exercises that exist. There's a push and a pull. Right?
Yeah, well, that's what I said to you, I think when I was kind of a few years into training, and you were like, is this all the exercises we do? And I'm like, there's only so many. And any ones like kind of outside of these are kind of made up versions of two of these squished together. And not really like something new. It's just like that one and that one less optimal.
I really like variety. Like in my diet, I can't eat the same thing every day. In my workout, I don't like doing this. So Aoife would just change the order so that I was just doing things at a different time. But yeah, I think there's only so many exercises that will deliver the results that women are looking for. And if you are fortunate enough to be able to work with somebody like Ultimate Performance, where you can develop a bespoke plan that works for that person, the way that person's mind works, the way their body works, right? The way, you know, my top of my body works in a different way than the bottom of my body, and how I get results, then that's going to go a lot farther for them.
I think I used to say to you, there's only so many directions your body can move in. So, you know, there is going to ultimately be a very kind of like pooled selection of what's optimal. But I think when it comes to like seeing kind of plans online, you know, we've seen it a lot in the last kind of like 10 years in the fitness industry. A lot of information, a lot of conflicting information, a lot of things are kind of designed to be new, exciting, to kind of grab a viral clip. It's often kind of just missing the fact that, you know, the very simple things do work. And so yeah, when I first started working in the fitness industry, I was working in a gym, not as a trainer. I worked as a receptionist, and I was terrified of that gym floor because I didn't feel like I knew what I was doing. And all it took was for a trainer to be like, why don't I show you some weight training? And actually just having that assistance for a few sessions and actually going, okay, at least I now know what I'm doing when I come in here. It was like, you know, the snowball went from there, because once you kind of like get that confidence to go, okay, I'm not afraid of actually going into the gym and trying to move myself, then you start to feel good, and then you start to keep wanting to do it. But I think if I hadn't necessarily had that support in the beginning, I hated sports because I always felt like I was bad at them. So like I wasn't sporty growing up, and I used to like, I didn't want to do them because I was embarrassed, and I felt like, oh, I can't catch the ball, or I can't do that. And so quite often when we have a bad experience, you never want to touch anything to do with it. So I think it is really important to at least try and give yourself, especially initially, a good experience. Find someone who can support you through that, so you aren't going in and kind of going, I don't know what to do in here. Okay, well, I'm never going to touch that ever again.
I think as trainers, we also we want people who come into the gym to learn how to do it. We want them to feel comfortable. We want them to feel confident. We want them to get the results that they want. We want them to experience how strength training can make you feel, how it can change how you can look. And I think that's also something that might be lost, is that actually gyms can be a really encouraging environment if you get the right ones. And usually up and down the country, they're going to have the right ones and the right environments where people are going to they're going to feel welcome, they're going to feel supported. And actually some of the gyms I've been in are the friendliest gyms you're going to see. And I think that's just because everybody has a common purpose, they've got a common goal, and people aren't focused really on you. They're focused on what they're doing. If I'm halfway through a workout, I'm nearly dead. So it's like I have no comprehension of anything that goes on behind me. So I think once you kind of get into a position where you feel it actually is okay environment, then it really, really does start pushing.
I think historically, women maybe have been afraid of gym and strength training because it has been a very masculine space. And that is really changing. And if they can just, the more women get in there, because we'll start changing the narrative on that as well if more of us get into the gym and start training there too.
That's one thing I was thinking about earlier, is actually the narrative of people coming into the gyms now is changing, because they are saying not just that they want to change their body composition in terms of fat loss, they are saying, I want glutes, I want to train my back, I want to train. It is usually kind of like a 25 to 35-year-old market that comes in, but the narrative is starting to change. Like they are asking, how do I grow this? How do I do this? How do I do this? And it is moving. It's not just, I want to lose lots of weight. Sometimes that is the goal, and that's not a problem, but it is starting to slowly change. And I think if we can just keep pushing that, we are going to have a completely different narrative, which is so much better.
Yeah, well, the amount of women I see in the gym comparison to when I first started training to now is like, it's kind of like worlds apart. When I first started going up onto the gym floor and kind of, going into the free weights, I would have been very much the only girl there. Where now, even like I think we've looked at like in our Kensington gym, like we have more female clients than we have male, and it's not necessarily from a lot of Kensington clients have been with us for a long time, so they're not there to lose weight anymore. They're there to get strong and to build muscle. And I have probably more women who want to build their upper bodies than I ever did in the past. Quite often that was always the fear, or I don't want to get big arms. Where half my ladies ask to train arms. They're like, I want to have strong arms. I want to look jacked. So that watching that culture shift has been like over the course of my career has actually been really exciting.
You also talk about strength training like sculpting, like things are an illusion, which I think is really interesting.
I come from like kind of a like art background, and so I often think of it as like we constantly focus on like getting smaller, but you just end up being a smaller version of the same thing. And actually a physique is something that's built from perspective. If you have a kind of like you wanted your waist to look smaller, that's not just about losing your waist. That's actually get your back more muscular, get your legs more muscular, and now your waist looks tiny in the middle. So much of like how I'm looking at programming when I have a client come in is I'm actually looking at like what their body shape is and how you can change that over time with training to kind of like build a physique. because a lot of it is perspective, you know. When we see people who like have very built shoulders and back, they often look very, very slim around their waist. And it's not because they have a tiny waist, it's because they've got a big back. And I think it's often just reversing that thinking of like, it's not everything doesn't have to get smaller all the time. I think as women, we often, you know, throughout society, we've often been thinking, oh, get smaller, get smaller, get smaller. And actually, no, it's get bigger. Well, it's going to counteract atrophy. So like when you're going to hit your perimenopause, estrogen supports your muscle tissue. So that decline in estrogen is going to cause your muscles to atrophy more over time. So when you're training, you are going to counteract this loss of muscle. And muscle atrophy is, again, going to be the things that are going to lead to things like hip fractures.
Yeah.
You're much more prone to falls. And so you want to actually still be able to retain that muscle, and it's about muscle retention more than it's necessarily about building muscle, but it's being aware that your muscle mass is going to decline once you hit your perimenopause. So that part is happening. But if you're training, you're going to be able to slow that down. You're going to be able to counteract it. But you are going to atrophy. So that's the thing that you kind of have to bear in mind when it comes to including weight training, is it's actually kind of almost like a non-negotiable if you want to maintain any form of kind of like muscular strength. And when I say muscular strength, I don't mean like being able to lift weights. I mean simply being able to lower yourself down into a chair. You know, there's quite a lot of our longevity is kind of, I think there's a test you can do where it's like how much you need to put your hands on your lap when you get in and out of a chair is a big indicator of your longevity. And if you have to put your hands on your legs, you should really be thinking about going to the gym. I think that's a nice, easy one for everyone to test out, which is, can you stand up in and out of a chair without grabbing your legs? And if you can't, then, you know, train, please.
I think most doctors will say that you could do cardio a few times a week, but strength training is a non-negotiable. Because with the drop in estrogen, it actually, the act of strength training is kind of like mimics estrogen production a little bit. I'm kind of overstating it, but it does create an environment for your body to thrive. And if we lose muscle mass, then that leads to loss of bone density, which then leads to osteoporosis, which then leads to the hip fractures we talked about. And with all of us living longer, we need to protect that. And the sooner we start, the better.
Thank you, guys. That's all for today. Menopause isn't the end. It can be the beginning of strength, resilience, and a key to a better life.